Welcome to Against the Cage, New York Post MMA podcast. I am Jake Aryeh, the producer here at the Post, but more important than that, I'm a lover of MMA and talking everything about it. I'm also joined by my two esteemed colleagues, Scott Fontana and Erich Richter. Gentlemen, it is great to be here with you. Before we get started, tell the people who you are and what you're about.
What's going on, guys? Eric Richter here. I'm the gambling guy here at the New York Post. I do all gambling picks. I do NFL. I do all the sports, but MMA is really where I got my background at. I was, formerly an analyst for MMA over at the Action Network, came over here, still doing MMA picks every week and hoping to give you guys some winners this week. I also do a ton of interviews. You're going to see me throughout, hopefully a long time here at the Against the Cage podcast, doing interviews, doing the whole thing. And I'm excited. Thanks for taking the time. And hopefully it's the beginning of a long, profitable relationship.
And as for me, I am Scott Fontana. I've been covering MMA for the Post here since 2020, but I go all the way back to 2011 when I started professionally covering mixed martial arts. I go even further back as a fan to 2007, 2008. Not quite that Ultimate Fighter range, but kind of that post-Ultimate Fighter. Everybody was coming aboard. I'm a big fan of the sport, and you've probably seen a lot of my interviews for the New York Post. I hope you watch them. I hope you watch some more and enjoy this program that we're starting.
Alrighty, so now we got that out of the way. We got to address what went on this past weekend down under in Sydney. Dricus Du Plessis took on Sean Strickland and was able to defend his middleweight title. Scott, Eric, what did you guys think about that fight? What were the main takeaways from it? Because there were some things that happened in the aftermath that we'll talk about shortly. So let's just set this up for the audience.
It was a dominant performance by Dricus Du Plessis. Any doubts that people had from a year earlier between these two fighters, whether they should be on equal footing, I think that has been put to rest. DDP is definitively the champion of the middleweight division, rightfully so. Broke Strickland's nose a few times in that third round. Strickland never showed enough urgency to get anything done and turn the tide of the fight. It was all DDP. Great performance.
Yeah, so when it comes to that fight, I mean, I wasn't a huge fan of Strickland getting a title shot against Israel Adesanya to begin with. He came out with the win. To be honest, I wasn't a huge fan of the fight. The result was the result, but this was kind of, I guess a little bit of an expected turn. Strickland's been in the game for a long time. He's taken a lot of damage. So this is kind of where it happens in MMA, where there is a downturn. Strickland immediately came out after the fight, and he was talking about how his coach Eric Nicksick was on the Ariel Helwani podcast, and he kind of called him out a little bit about he's like, he won't be my coach again going forward, etc. I don't think it was the coach's fault. I think that is just one of those things where Dricus Du Plessis is a freak athlete at his weight class, and I think he's definitely the best fighter in the division. It's just funny to look back on. No one was expecting him to beat Robert Whittaker, and he beat the brakes off of Robert Whittaker, and Dricus has been on a crazy run since then. He's the 185 pound king for a reason, and there's a ton of good fights for him at that division. I'd like for him to stay there.
Yeah, no, all credit to DDP there, but kind of addressing the elephant in the room, sort of the bigger story at hand is the performance of Sean Strickland, and throughout the fight, you could just see that his coach, Eric Nicksick, was just begging him to do something different. I mean, he's been kind of known, people joke about him being a teep jab fighter, but it's kind of hard to argue that he did anything other than that during those 25 minutes, and that is why DDP came away with the win. After the fight, Eric Nicksick appeared on the Ariel Helwani show, and he was just as brutally honest with Sean Strickland than to the rest of the world live on air. He was calling his performance uninspiring. He said he was disappointed about the entire thing. And one of the things that he'd said that I felt was pretty big from that interview was him saying that, if this is Sean, if he's going to fight like that, he needs to maybe reevaluate what his goals are for the sport. What did you guys think about the interview, and what did you think what were your takeaways from it?
Well, I think Eric kind of touched on it a little bit, so I guess I'll kind of pile on here the fact that, yes, I think he's absolutely right. Sean Sean did not show any urgency in there. He fought exactly the same way he's fought pretty much every single fight that we've watched him at this level for the last several years, going all the way back, probably even further than this, but I think all the way back to the main event that he had against Jack Hermanson about 3 or 4 years ago. And this was a guy who was jab teeping, just like you said. He's still doing it. The only time we've ever seen any sort of urgency was when he has fighters very clearly hurt. It's happened against Abus Magomedov when he finished him. It happened at times against Israel Adesanya, but he doesn't take risks. No risks, no reward. In this fight, he needed to take those risks, and he just didn't do it. So I understand why Eric Nicksick is frustrated here. He's imploring this fighter, please do something. And he's just, unfortunately, this is what Sean Strickland is every single fight.
Yeah, I have a little bit of an issue with the comments from Nicksick actually, because from the fighter's perspective, from Strickland's perspective, like what was he supposed to do really? Like just throw caution to the wind and just go? Like we saw Justin Gaethje do that against Max Holloway. We saw how that ended up. So from my perspective, it's like Sean Strickland got to the title jabbing and teeping. Why wouldn't he just continue doing that? Like if you're just gonna, if you're gonna throw caution to the wind, Francis Ngannou style, and just start running at him with, right and left hooks, I mean, you're gonna get hurt real bad. For me, by the end of the fight, especially in Strickland, there's fighters do this all the time. Live to fight another day at some level. So I think rather than take like earth-shattering damage against Dricus, which was like, I mean, he took a ton of damage, but it could have been worse. For me, it's like a self-preservation thing, and also you got him to this is what got him to the dance. You can't change your whole strategy once you're in the title, even though urgency is needed. You can't change your whole strategy there. So I had a little bit of an issue with that. I think Strickland calling him an influencer now is interesting because I feel like every coach does interviews now, so I'm not sure exactly where he's getting that from. But I didn't love the comments from Nicksick. But yeah, I don't really get the throw caution to the wind thing. He's not that kind of fighter. He's never has been. So why would he do that now after he's been hurt for 4 rounds?
For me personally, I mean, like, what we're looking at is a fighter who's fighting mixed martial arts. He doesn't shoot for any takedowns in this fight. He's not trying to change anything up, push against the cage, change up your tactics a little bit. Rounds 1 through 3 were not going his way. You got to do something different. You don't have to necessarily go out there and throw haymakers and go wild, but you've got other skills. Try them out. You didn't do it.
Yeah, I rewatched some of what Nicksick was, saying to Sean. There was a lot of him just being like, "Hey, listen, like you need to, throw a higher output and push a little bit more." But he was pretty much saying, from what I gathered, like you need to start doing different things. Throw that straight right. Just do anything that's different than the teep jab, because if he was going to do that, he knew that the fight was lost essentially. If it was gonna keep going the way it was gonna be 50-45, which I guess is a good time to ask Scott, being a expert in judging. Was it a 50-45 to you?
I had it 49-46. Offhand, I'm trying to remember which round I even gave him. Maybe I'm wrong, but anyway, it was. Look, it doesn't matter at this point in this type of fight because that's not going to swing the decision of this fight. There is no calculus that gets 3 rounds for Sean Strickland. That's a loss.
Yeah. Eric, it seems like you were surprised. My question was going to be, were you surprised that he not just appeared on the podcast? Because I didn't think that was that strange when it was announced. I was like, oh, okay, he's gonna explain what went wrong and what could have been done better. But it really was just him being like, yeah, I don't think that Sean was in that fight and like he could have done better. Were you guys surprised that happened?
Yeah, as a coach, like you probably shouldn't pile onto a fighter, right? Especially right afterwards. So maybe I would advise against going onto a big time show like that on a Monday right after you're just lost pretty embarrassingly. But for me, it's tough because Strickland's this is what got him to the dance. So it's like I just don't understand why you're doing it. I already covered that. I don't know. I mean, other coaches do interviews. Like John Kavanaugh does interviews. Dean Thomas was on the show earlier that day. Like. And Dean Thomas isn't a coach, but I mean, he's a fighter and all that stuff, and he's definitely in
former coach. He coached a lot.
Yeah, but recently, as much he's not like a head coach. So I don't know. Like these guys do interviews, so I just don't understand what the beef was with him doing an interview as an influencer. Now I thought that was a ridiculous comment, but I mean, Sean just lost badly, so this is kind of is what it is. He's gotten to a pretty high level, higher level than I thought he would in his MMA career.
Yeah, Scott, any just quickly, were you surprised or any thoughts on just the fact that it went the way it did?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You don't expect a coach to throw their fighter under the bus, and frankly, he did. I mean, that is what it is. Could it have been a way that he was hoping to motivate Sean? I don't know. I can't get into his head there, but you don't expect any coach, especially on a Monday, like you said, the emotions are high. It's you got to let yourself cool down a little bit. But he made a decision. He did what he wanted to do, and obviously he wanted to send a message to Sean, which he wasn't receiving the other day. I don't know if this is like a self-preservation kind of thing because he's coaching other fighters, or if he's just truly just hoping to help his fighter here, who they're coach fighter relationship, they're friends, but it doesn't seem like it's heading in that direction for that much longer, right?
Yeah, I think this is a good opportunity for us to transition into the comments that Sean had said. Eric, you referenced it throughout the show so far. But yeah, basically, Sean did a follow-up video, sort of telling his fans like what he thinks, because he said that he was getting tagged a bunch. And he said, him and Eric are still good friends. They'll continue to be friends. Will he be in his corner? Probably not. He was saying that the only reason why he had to make this video is because, and there's some profanity in there, which I won't say, but, Eric had to go be a podcast influencer, essentially. And then for the rest of the video, he was kind of just giving his own side of the story, quote unquote. Not really much about what happened in the octagon, but what happened prior in terms of camp. That staph infection that people were talking about, very, very apparent. Maybe that had something to that. Sean would say that affected him during the fight. He said he also had some, little nags and injuries, which, happen. Fighters go into fights injured, but apparently it seemed like a very bad camp for him. What did you guys think about his comments and, kind of rounding out that whole situation?
Well, Eric has already touched upon the idea of him being an influencer. He obviously does not love that comment, and I understand that because, obviously he's trying to, they're trying to egg each other on at this point, and they're sniping through the media. This is not how you stay friends. So if you think you're going to be friends with this man, it might be best to close the doors, not talk to folks like myself or any other reporters or put it on social media for that matter. There's a lot of raw emotions here. It almost seems like it's just going to get worse unless they can get into a room and just hash this out. So there's a lot of frustration on both sides. I can understand it. Sean is the one who's in there. He's the fighter. Everything is on him. But at the same time, the coach is there because he's trying to help you. If you're not responding to the coach, what can he do?
Yeah. No, that's a very good point.
No, you're right, Scott. I hear you. You're not wrong.
Alrighty, so I think that
I like to hear that.
Alrighty, so as far as the main event, that wasn't the entire story. DDP, after his win against Sean Strickland, of course, looked across the octagon to Alex Pereira, the light heavyweight champion of the world. Pereira does not speak English, so he could not understand exactly what was being said, but I think he got the idea. DDP calls out Pereira, and on Daniel Cormier's YouTube channel, he shared that once Pereira was told what he said, Pereira told him that, listen, he's just too small for him. What do you guys think about that matchup? Is there an appetite for it? Does it make any sense? What do you guys think?
There's not a whole lot for him at 205, especially if he beats Ankalaev next month. And we'll talk about that when we get there. But if he beats Ankalaev, there's not a whole lot for him at 205. I mean, Rakic just lost to Yuri. He's beaten Yuri twice. Jamal Hill he beat. I don't really want to see a rematch there. So you can do whatever you want at 205. Anything with Pereira will sell. So from my perspective, sure, if you want to. I like 185 for Dricus. I'd rather him fight Hamzat and see how that goes first before we even start talking about moving up. I hate that when fighters do that. It's like there's clearly a good matchup here with Hamzat. Let's get that one out of the way. But yeah, I mean, you can do whatever you want with Pereira because it's going to be amazing because he's just such a fun fighter to watch.
Dricus is too small for 205 at this point, especially for someone like Alex Pereira, who at this point we're actually fantasizing more having him fight at heavyweight. There's a lot more intrigue of him going to heavyweight than him staying at 205 and fighting the middleweight champ, who's got many more fights at middleweight at this point. I mean, you've got Nasruddin Imavov. You've got who's probably next, Hamzat Chimaev. We're looking at a lot of Kyle Bahayo. We're looking at a lot of work to be done at middleweight, and I just don't think there's enough juice between Dricus and Alex Pereira. It doesn't matter that Pereira was in Strickland's corner for this fight. That's just not enough juice to make this happen. There's other things both of them can do, so I'd rather go that way.
Yeah, no, I think I completely agree with the two of you. There are other challenges. Mainly, Hamzat is for the forefront of this conversation. Not quite as much as, say, like Tom Aspinall in New York City when Jones and Stipe were fighting. That's a little bit of a different situation, but it did feel like Hamzat was kind of hovering over this fight, and I feel like that's too big of a thing to just push off. And like you said, there's some weight discrepancies and other things that might not make the fight make sense, but if DDP can beat Hamzat, that could possibly put me over the edge, I think. Maybe. That would be a crazy tower to topple. So that's all I have to say about that. Now, so that's the main event covered. There was also a co-main event, of course, the women's strawweight title. Zhang Weili defending against Tatiana Suarez. Just a emphatic performance from the champion. I think a lot of people now consider her as the #1 ranked pound for pound women's fighter. It's either her or Valentina Shevchenko, which now looks like a very appetizing matchup. Breaking down or just doing a quick recap of the fight, what did you guys like, and what do you think was of note, some takeaways from that?
Well, I mean, as far as the takeaway, I mean, the fact that we saw Zhang Weili absolutely dominate the wrestling after, say, the first 3 or 4 minutes in this fight was probably the biggest stunner. There were a lot of people who thought that Tatiana Suarez was going to win, and not just because she was the betting favorite here. Obviously, that's an indicator, but there were people for years, I'll put myself in there, that saw Tatiana Suarez as the future of 2 weight classes. I thought she was capable of winning at 115 and 125. We've seen her pick up victories over women who have been champions at both of those weight classes, and she looked good doing it. I never thought in a million years that it would just go completely the other way. I certainly had a lot of respect for Zhang Weili, and I said, hey, if anybody's going to beat Tatiana Suarez, it was going to be her, because I see her as an all-time type of fighter, and she proved it here. She is an all-time type of fighter. I think she is absolutely the best strawweight that we have seen in mixed martial arts, period. She is fantastic. The domination of the wrestling was just intense. That's my biggest takeaway.
Yeah, hard to agree. Yeah, on everything that you said. Zhang Weili looked amazing, and I bet on her, so I was pretty happy.
I was going to ask you about that because we don't see Zhang Weili as an underdog going into fights, and if correct me if I'm wrong, when it came to them walking into the octagon, Zhang was still an underdog. So I'm assuming you saw that value as too much to pass up.
100%.
Yeah. So the big question coming from this, I kind of, referenced it before. Everyone's talking about, is Zhang going to move up to flyweight to face definitely the top 2 women's pound for pound fighters in the world are in either order. I think most of us seem to think that right now it's Zhang Weili, but Valentina Shevchenko is number 2. Pound for pound #1 versus pound for pound #2 is always going to be something that makes people salivate. Do you think that it makes sense right now? Because at 125, there is obviously Manon Fiorot has earned her title shot. As far as the next challenger at 125, I think we can all agree that she is the next one. But sometimes, with the UFC and in mixed martial arts and prize fighting, it isn't always a meritocracy. What do you guys see as the right move? What do you want to see?
Yeah, for me, I mean, this is the obvious fight to make. Dana pretty much said so in the post-fight press conference, that he was going to be meeting with the team of Zhang Weili, and they were going to ask for it. And yeah, that's the next fight to make. It's the obvious fight to make. Super fight. Super excited for that. Could honestly headline a card, which we haven't seen in really a long time, since Amanda Nunes was headlining some pay-per-views. Ronda Rousey was headlining some pay-per-views. I think that could headline a pay-per-view. If it's a co-main event, it's a super card, International Fight Week, something crazy. That's an amazing fight. Zhang Weili goes up in weight. Valentina Shevchenko has been one of the best fighters in the women's weight classes for a long time. It depends if she's lost a step. Zhang Weili's super strong, as she showed, as Scott pointed out, against Tatiana Suarez. So that's a super fight. I don't even know how I'd line it. I don't know who'd be favored. It's an amazing fight.
Look, I love the fight too. I if that ends up being the next fight, I'm not going to complain. I also see some pathways where they can put it off just one more time because we have been building up to Manon Fiorot fighting against Valentina Shevchenko for quite a while now. I don't really understand why there's no urgency to book this fight, which seems apparent that it should have been booked a long time ago. Holding up a few things here. I'm okay with them booking that fight first. And in the process, we keep Zhang Weili busy with something else. And there are a few options you could go for here. We could go with Virna Jandiroba if she is able to beat Yan Xiaonan in April. We could go with Yasmin Lucindo if she can beat Amanda Lemos, excuse me, in March. Or, and I think this is almost the most likely of the three, Mackenzie Dern, who won last month.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I
I was
don't
gonna
think.
say I was
Yeah,
thinking that too. Two straight wins, one by submission. Yeah, I could see it.
Mackenzie Dern is a fan favorite. If you're going to put off a fight, that could be one that intrigues the fans. I guess that wraps up UFC 312. Very excited to see what happens next as far as those matchups. It doesn't, you know what? As far as what happens, I don't think that there's any scenario in where the fans lose. So I guess that's my takeaway. Now, so that's the UFC news wrapped up. We've also got some PFL news that happened this week. Scott, I think you could take it away from here.
Yeah, absolutely. So the PFL announced they started rolling out their rosters for the world tournaments that they're going to have this year, which are replacing the old season format that we had in the United States and North America and that kind of thing. We've got the roster for the welterweights and we've got the roster for the featherweights. And I do want to start with the welterweights because I think this is an intriguing field here, headlined by three former Bellator champions, Jason Jackson, Andrei Koreshkov, and former interim champion Logan Storley. I think there's some real talent here, and I actually did speak to Jason Jackson earlier this week about who he'd want to fight in this field, who kind of stands out to him. So let's take a look at what he said. Have you been looking forward to any of these names? Because again, you've all come from the same place, so you
Prescott,
know they're not
Prescott,
familiar.
Prescott, Prescott, for sure.
Hmm.
Been on my radar a few times. Went in the
Of course.
Bellator field, but for some reason, somehow, I leaped over him.
And there's other great names in here too. Magomedov, who won the or who was the runner-up of last year's PFL season tournament. There's a lot of former Bellator guys here. I think it's a wonderful field. Do you guys have any thoughts on it?
I'm mostly a wake me up when for PFL and not in the best. I'm not. I follow PFL, but it honestly like wake me up when Hughes and Ganu wake me up when they're fighting. Until then, I don't believe that PFL is going to be. Maybe PFL will make it, but lowering the prizes, killing the season. It does feel like there's some cutbacks PFL is making, so a little concerned about them as a promotion. And yeah, I'm more interested to see where even like Dakota Ditchova, like I want to see those guys fight more than I'm interested in like their season format. For whatever reason, for me, it just doesn't get there.
Well,
Well, it's not the season anymore. That's the point. It is now tournaments. So what we have here is a very set structure that's a little different than last year. They've gotten rid of a lot of the fat that I think was there when you had these standings and you had two fights that you'd have that would get you into the playoffs and a lot of it depended on matchmaking there. There's still matchmaking, but hey, people like tournaments. MMA, there's a lot of tournament in its lifeblood, in its history. We're thinking one night tournaments usually, but there's been some good, interesting history of tournaments here. They did cut, as you alluded to, the prize pool to it's $500,000 to the winner of these instead of the million who'd win the season. Obviously, that is true. But what we have, I think, again, this is an interesting field to me. If you were someone who watched Bellator, a lot of these names are familiar and I think interesting.
yeah, I think from a newer fan, obviously UFC is more in the limelight than the PFL. It's no secret, they're trying to capture, some of that market that the UFC has just swallowed over the years. But I definitely think that doing away with the season format, I mean, you were explaining some of how it worked before, and it's already, in one ear, out the other. So for fans that are, maybe looking to get more MMA into their life, the barrier to entry of just like having to understand how those seasons work, I think it's a little much. So I definitely agree with the decision that they made to just go to a regular, straightforward tournament, one loss, you're out sort of deal, single elimination. So I think that was definitely a good move.
And I should highlight too, Jake, that there's the featherweight roster was brought out as well. I don't think there's as much appeal to this one as there is to the welterweight roster. There's some interest here, but I would say probably the most intriguing names in this field are Jesus Pinedo, who won the PFL season in 2023, has not fought since. But in that, he did beat Gabriel Braga in the final, who is also part of this. Adam Boric, former Bellator title challenger, also in the field as well. So there's some names, there's some interest. It's a little less, for me personally, than we've seen in some of these other ones, but it's not bad.
Alrighty, so I guess that rounds out some of the PFL news. We've also got some new announcements as far as fights go. Steve Erceg is going to be fighting Brandon Moreno as the headliner for a fight night card in Mexico City on March 29th. First off, before we move on, any thoughts on that fight before we get to some of the other news? What do you guys like about that?
Yeah, I'll go there. Brandon Moreno, interviewed him a couple months ago. You could tell how much it hurt him that he didn't fight on the Sphere card, and I'm interested to see this one especially because it's in Mexico City, so it's going to have that same aura to it. Obviously, it won't be in the Sphere, but it's going to have like the big. Obviously, it's in Mexico, his own country. It depends on where he's at right now. He says he feels better than ever. Of course he does. We'll see. He's, taking a lot of damage, as we know, and fighters as they get older. But, Steve Erceg is, a really, really good athlete. I think this fight's going to be super interesting. I'm not sure if there's odds on it yet. I'm trying to pull them up, but that's an interesting fight. I'd say Brandon's probably going to be an underdog. So we'll see. We're going to find out a lot about Brandon Moreno there.
And then
I like the fight.
Yeah.
I do. I like the fight, but I think it's a really good booking. I think these are the two fighters that ought to be fighting each other at this point in the flyweight division. So good job, UFC, getting that together.
Alrighty, and then they also announced that they're going to be returning back to Montreal, and it'll be the first time that they go back there in nearly 10 years, a few months shy, as well as they announced the dates for International Fight Week, which will be from June 25th to June 29th, typically around that July 4th weekend, which they've continued to follow that pattern this year.
That's UFC 315 is the Montreal one, by the way.
Thank you, Scott. Alrighty, so with some of the news that's happened and some looking forward that we've just done, let's continue that. With this weekend, we have Jared Cannonier taking on Gregory Rodriguez. I believe it's at the Apex, which I don't know where
it's at the Apex. It is at the Apex. It's 4 p.m. Eastern Time prelims, 7 p.m. Eastern Time main card, ESPN Plus.
Yes. Two of these guys, vets, Jared Cannonier and RoboCop, which, by the way, is one of the coolest nicknames a fighter could have. I think his name is basically RoboCop at this point, and it fits perfectly. What do you guys think about that fight?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like a crazy fight. Doesn't have any title implications in it. We're going to see if Jared Cannonier's kind of toast. He turns 41 in a little bit more than a month. So, we're going to find out everything we need to know about Jared Cannonier. He's getting older, and we'll see how it goes. What do you think, Scott?
I just wonder what the heck the point of this fight is. Like, it's as far as it being a main event. I know we were talking about fight nights at the UFC Apex, and at this point, there's not a lot of appeal to most of those cards. It's kind of like just some fights, as Ben Folks would say, and that's what we have here. Whatever happens to the winner here, I mean, are they going to fight for a title? Are they even going to be in the title mix? I don't see that. So it's really just like, oh, here's some fights on. Have some fun watching.
It reminds me of when they would just throw Holly Holm in main events.
Well, listen, the main event might not be doing too much for you guys, but I know that you guys are interested in some of the fights below it. Eric, which one has caught your attention?
I like grappling, man. I've always liked grappling. Grappling's my favorite style of fighter. I know everybody likes to see knockouts. I'm fine with watching chess matches. Andre Petrosky versus Rodolfo Vieira is an amazing fight. That I'm so excited for it. Petrosky's a very good offensive grappler, but a bad defensive grappler. And Vieira, we've seen him get submitted as well, even though he's a jiu-jitsu savant and known as one of the best jiu-jitsu practitioners in the mixed martial arts space. So I'm very interested to see where this goes. I betting wise, I don't have anything on this one. Petrosky's a big underdog, rightfully so. He should be. Bad gas tank. I could see Vieira definitely taking Mount pretty quick and ending this one. But I think this can be super fun. A lot of fun scrambles, and if this gets into the second and third rounds, I mean, neither of these guys are known for their cardio, so this is gonna be just a really fun fight.
And then Scott, I know you've got one that you've got your eye on.
Yeah, here's a little bit of a deep cut because they kind of buried it deep into the prelims for whatever particular reason. I don't know how they structure these cards these days, but this fight ought to be much higher and much more prominent. I love the fight between Gabriel Bonfim and Chaos Williams. These are two of the most interesting, I think, of that, like, outside of the top 15 prospects at the welterweight division. I think the winner of this one has a chance to go on and do something very fascinating. We've got Cass Williams is always fun to watch because he has absolute dynamite in his hands. Gabriel Bonfim has always been impressive after he came off the Dana White Contender Series. I'm very intrigued by this one. I would have put this like even a co-main. I think this is really co-main event worthy.
Now, I think that's a good segue into a segment that we are going to be doing each week, talking about the structure of cards. Scott, you have devised an algorithm, shall we say, a formula to rate the strength of cards. Could you tell the audience what to expect?
Yeah, so just to give you a brief kind of intro on what this rating is. So in simplest terms, this is a rating for MMA events that takes into account the ranking of each fighter on the card based on fight matrices generated historical rankings. Main events, co-main events, as well as main card carry extra weight in the algorithm. This does not factor in things like potential for fireworks, is going to be an entertaining fight, or if someone is a big draw. It's purely about the ranking. I've converted this rating to a percentile between 0 and 100, make it a little easier to process, but also allows it to rank against all the other UFC events going back to 2005, which was the year The Ultimate Fighter began.
Alrighty, so with this weekend, have you ran the numbers yet on what the percentile for this fight card is?
I am. We're looking at something in the 18th percentile, which, hey, does that sound good to you? It's not. We're talking about something in kind of like the middle of the pack Apex cards last year. It's not as bad as maybe some of these ones that we've been presented with over the years. Like last year, they led off with Ankalaev against Walker, and I don't know if anybody remembers that particular card being of no interest, but it was of no interest. And this is much more interesting, and I think it's because the prelims are actually very deep. This is one of those cards where I would actually recommend you dialing into the prelims and watching those. And if you don't stay for the main event, whatever.
Alrighty, now that we've talked a little bit about the overview of the card, I think I'm going to throw it to Eric for his special segment, 3 bets in 3 minutes. The clock is ticking. Eric, what do you have for us?
3 fights, 3 minutes, and we're going to go back to Chaos Williams here. I love Chaos Williams here at underdog odds. Give me a plus 180 on Chaos Williams. I think he wins by knockout here. I mean, his striking defense isn't very good, but you want a fighter that's going to throw caution to the wind, especially when you get underdog price. He's got crazy punching power. Bonfim, I like him. I think he's definitely better at striking defense. But, for me, I think that Bonfim, if he gets rocked, I think he's going to shoot for his life on a takedown. Chaos Williams not bad at defending takedowns, 80% takedown defense rating. Chaos Williams very good athlete. Cardio is definitely an issue here. It's kind of how it goes when you're betting an underdog, but Chaos Williams just has a bunch of ways to win here. I mean, you could just land something crazy, and then you could, kind of scar Bonfim for the rest of the fight. So give me Chaos Williams there, plus 180 as an underdog. For the main event, we talked about it. Could be a little sleepy one. RoboCop doesn't really go to decisions very often, but who does is Jared Cannonier. He's fought in 5-round fights in each of his last 5 fights. He has gone to decision in 4 of those 5 fights, and the one that didn't go to decision also went to the 5th round. So the way that I'm betting this one, Cannonier, lower volume striker at this point. I mean, obviously he has set records, for striking volume, but at this point in his career, I think that he is in the last couple fights, he hasn't really shown a lot of volume, and I think that going forward, that is going to be an area of concern as he gets older. So if you're risk averse, goes the distance plus 250 on this fight to go to the decision, or if you're less risk averse and want to go over 2.5 rounds, that's minus 115. But that's kind of where I'm at. And if you're really risky, you can go RoboCop by decision at plus 500. I'm totally fine with that. Call him HoboCop. For the since his name is Gregory Rodriguez. And then super long shot here, Calvin Kattar by decision plus 900, fighting Youssef Zallah. Not a world beater. He has lost in the UFC many times in the past. He lost 3 in a row at one point. He went to a draw with Damone Blackshear, excuse me. He went to a draw with Blackshear. He's lost a bunch of fights here in the UFC. He's just not a world beater. I don't think Calvin Kattar's washed. I really don't. And I think plus 900 for win by decision. It's his most likely win condition is volume striking. Especially if Zalal's getting hit. I think Kattar's going to keep going forward. Again, another guy that'll fight for your money. Plus 900. You can do worse. We'll be keeping score here. We're keeping records. Keep your receipts. And if you want to fade me, feel free. But don't fade me Sunday night after the fights end. Or Saturday night when the fights end, hit me up beforehand. Tell me that you hate it. I have no issues eating my words on betting picks. I'm not new to this game.
Let Eric know in the comments. Alrighty. So with that, we've looked ahead. It's actually time to look back, not to past weekend, but even further back. We'll wrap up the show by doing a little bit of history, MMA history, if you will, this week in MMA history. Scott, what happened on this week in MMA?
Well, 2 years ago, we're not even going to go back too far, but this was one of the most consequential things that happened this particular week. Islam Makhachev against Alexander Volkanovski, the first time at UFC 284. This was the pound-for-pound battle, and it was, I think everybody kind of looked at this as the 2 best pound-for-pound fighters going at it. Dana White did not. I'm sure he was just like, well, it's John Jones. But this was a fantastic fight. I think it lived up to the hype, even though Makhachev looked fantastic against Volkanovski. Volkanovski had real fight in him in this one. This was a really momentous fight, and I think a lot of people will remember it very well. Probably you too, Eric, right?
Oh my God, this fight was amazing. A lot of money on Volkanovski as a big underdog, and it was a tough decision for a lot of bettors out there.
He almost got it done. I mean, watching that fight, that 5th round was insane. Having Islam be on his back, it's not something you see every day. Sticking with the theme, we're going to keep talking about some MMA history. For newer fans like myself, COVID was a big boom in terms of the UFC and MMA fandom. I myself started watching regularly at that point. They might not be aware of some of the classic fights that have happened in the past. So as an assignment for fans like myself and others who might be watching, Eric and Scott, particularly who's been watching for a very long time, what is a fight that newer fans might not have seen that they absolutely have to, or even for fans that have been watching for a while and should rewatch?
Yeah, I'm going to give you guys all something, especially you, Jake. I want you guys to all go watch Frankie Edgar versus Gray Maynard, the second fight, UFC 125. That was New Year's Day, 2011. I think this is just like everybody who likes the sport and missed it needs to go back and watch it. And if you haven't watched it in a while, no matter how you felt about the fights on Saturday or how you feel about them, you can always count on this one to deliver the drama, the entertainment, and all that. I don't want to spoil too much for you, Jake. I'm sure you know a little bit, but we'll talk more about it when we meet again in 2 weeks, right?
Yes. Alrighty, guys. I think
An all-timer.
Yeah.
Gotta watch.
Alrighty, beautiful. So a little homework assignment for me and for you guys watching. Let us know in the comments if you do end up watching that fight, which you should. Let us know how you like it. Well, I think that's a good transition to the outro. I'm good. Eric, you good? Scott?
I'm good.
Alrighty,
Enjoy the
we'll
fights.
see you guys soon.